Word by word synonyms. Saha, that one, the Supreme Independent Person who, through his external energy, has created the material mind, which is the cause of all suffering in this material world. Tvam, you are. He, indeed. Nitya, eternally. Vijita Atma, conquered. Gunaha, whose property of the intelligence. Swadamna, by your personal spiritual energy. Kalaha, the time element, which creates and annihilates. Vashikrita, brought under your control. Vishrijya, by which all effects, Visarga, and causes. Shakti, the energy. Chakre, in the wheel of time, the repetition of birth and death. Vishrishtam, being thrown. Ajaya, by your external energy. The mode of ignorance. Ishvara, O Supreme Controller. Shodasha Urahi, with 16 spokes. The 5 material elements, the 10 senses, and the leader of the senses, namely the mind. Nispidyamanam, being crushed under that wheel. Upakarsha, kindly take me to the shelter of your lotus feet. Vibho, O Supreme Great. Prapanam, who am fully surrendered unto you. Translation. My dear Lord, O Supreme Great, you have created this material world of 16 constituents, but you are transcendental to their material qualities. In other words, these material qualities are under your full control, and you are never conquered by them. Therefore, the time element is your representation. My Lord, O Supreme, no one can conquer you. As for me, however, I am being crushed by the wheel of time, and therefore I surrender fully unto you. Now kindly take me under the protection of your lotus feet. So you can repeat, my dear Lord, O Supreme Great, you have created this material world of 16 constituents, but you are transcendental to their material qualities. In other words, these material qualities are under your full control, and you are never conquered by them. Therefore, the time element is your representation. My Lord, O Supreme, no one can conquer you. As for me, however, I am being crushed by the wheel of time. Therefore, I surrender fully unto you. Now kindly take me under the protection of your lotus feet. So purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The wheel of material miseries is also a creation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but He is not under the control of the material energy. Rather, He is the controller of the material energy, whereas we, the living entities, are under its control. When we give up our constitutional position, Jivera Swarupo Hoy Krishnera Nichidas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead creates this material energy and her influence over the conditioned soul. Therefore, He is the Supreme, and only He can deliver the conditioned soul from the onslaught of material nature Mam eva ye prapajante, mayam etam taranti te. Maya, the external energy, continuously imposes upon the conditioned souls the suffering of the threefold miseries of this material world. Therefore, in the previous verse, Prahlad Maharaj prayed to the Lord, "But for your lordship, no one can save me." Prahlad Maharaj has also explained that a child's protectors, his parents, cannot save the child from the onslaught of birth and death. Nor can medicine and a physician save one from death, nor can a boat or similar means of protection save a person drowning in the water, for everything is controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, suffering humanity must surrender to Krishna, as Krishna himself demands in his last instruction of the Bhagavad Gita in the 18th chapter, text 66. Sarvadharnaman parityaja mamikam sharanam braja aham tham sarvapapebhyo moksha yishyami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. All of human society must take advantage of this offer and thus be saved by Krishna from the danger of being crushed by the wheel of time, the wheel of past, present, and future. The word nishpidyamanam, being crushed, is very significant. Every living entity in the material condition is actually being crushed again and again. And to be saved from this position, one must take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then one will be happy. The word prapanam is also very significant, for unless one fully surrenders to the Supreme Lord, one cannot be saved from being crushed. A criminal is put in prison and punished by the government, but the same government, if it likes, can release the criminal from imprisoned life. Similarly, we must know conclusively that our material condition of suffering has been allotted to us by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and if we want to be saved from this suffering, we must appeal to the same controller. Thus, one can be saved from this material condition. So, Satvam hinetcha vishitatma guna swatamna kallo vashikrita vishrijya visarga shaktihi chakre vishishtam ajayeshvara sodashare nishpidyamanam upakarsha vivo prapanam. So, Om Ganat Simananda Shagaranjana Shlakaya Chakshuna Midiham Yena Tismai Shigurve Namaha. So, I don't know if any of you noticed, but Prabhupada said something very interesting in the first paragraph in the purport that really sort of clears up a lot of doubts. He says, when we give up our constitutional position, and then Prabhupada quotes Jivera Swarupa Hoy Krishnera Nityadas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead creates this material world. So the operative phrase is, when we give up our constitutional position. In other words, we voluntarily gave it up. And of course, there's Krishna Bhadri Mokkha, there's many, many statements to that effect that we actually deliberately, Krishna Bhadri Mokkha means we turned our face away from Krishna. In other words, we were looking at Krishna, conscious of Krishna, in our constitutional position. Prabhupada said, gave up our constitutional position of serving Krishna. Exactly what that means as far as, whether we were dancing with Krishna or playing with the cows or whatever, that's not really described. But in any case, we were established in our constitutional position of service, and we voluntarily gave it up out of curiosity, envy, what have you, and therefore we've come to the material world. We're criminals. I mean, every criminal, not everyone, but many criminals say, I'm innocent. They put me in jail, but actually I didn't do it. So we were also thinking like that we didn't do anything, but we actually did something. If you take the other position that we were put in the material world without having to do anything, which is the position that some people take, then that actually implies that Krishna is extremely cruel and punishes people for no reason whatsoever. In other words, he has some anger issues. There's like sometimes people have parents who have anger issues, and they abuse the children for no reason whatsoever. You know, if the poor child like has sniffles, then they just like beat the child to a pulp. And the poor children nowadays, of course, many children are traumatized by this. I was speaking to one psychiatrist yesterday, and she was explaining that one of the main things that she has to deal with is PTSD, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder. And she's not just simply dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder that's coming from people who are coming back from the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, or whatever. She's dealing with people who are suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder because of what happened basically in their homes. I mean, it's one thing to get attacked by someone on the street, you know, someone puts a gun in your head or whatever, it's a little traumatic. But if your mother, father, or someone you love actually attacks you, turns against you, whatever, that's actually quite traumatic. So God is not like that. He doesn't attack us, put us in prison, torture us, you know, like it says here. Anyway, unless one is surrendered to the Lord, he gets crushed. Anyway, the living entity in the material world condition is actually being crushed again and again. And, you know, there's some heavy stuff here, you know, being crushed. And actually we're experiencing that too. So in other words, Krishna is very kind. The material world is the purpose of teaching us that our real position is with Krishna. And the only reason that we're suffering in the material world, apart from the fact that we're separate from Krishna, is described by Srila Prabhupada in his translation of the first word here in the verse, the word saha. And Prabhupada says, giving a purported translation, he says, that one, the supreme independent person, who through his external energy has created the material mind, which is the cause of all suffering in this material world. That's another interesting operative phrase. The material mind is the cause of material suffering. I mean, of course, ultimately you could say it's because of our avoiding Krishna, but the intermediate cause here is the mind, the material mind, that has, what is the mind's business? Attachment. You know, as we hear from Krishna in the second chapter of the Gita, you know, jayata vishakapam sangos teshu pajayate. That when we contemplate things, you know, the mind is contemplating things, so we get attached to them. And because of that attachment, as it's described here, that attachment by the mind is the cause of our suffering. And of course, Buddha understood that too. I mean, of course, Buddha is God, incarnation of God. Buddha said, material world is suffering. Suffering's due to attachment. You know, the first two noble truths. And then the third one is, give up the attachment, no more suffering. And the fourth noble truth was, one can give up the attachment, therefore alleviating the suffering by following the Eightfold Path, you know, which is right thinking, you know, right living, etc., like that. Of course, he also meant being a vegetarian and also being nonviolent and all the other nice things. So the whole point is to give up the attachment. And just like last night, we were talking about different examples of how attachment causes suffering. I mean, there was this example we were giving last night based on the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam concerning this, the birds, Kapota and Kapoti. You understand? The two birds. And this Kapota and Kapoti, I'll just tell the story again because some of you weren't there, maybe you were there. They were two birds that were madly attached to each other, madly in love. And actually, it's interesting, according to the body that you get attached to different things. I mean, I don't think any of us would be extremely in love and attached to a bird. Maybe a cat. But not, but not, it's kind of funny. So, but we wouldn't be extremely attached to a bird, you know, just like all day long looking at a bird and hearing the chirping. You got some sound effects outside there, you know, the chirping of the bird. And just thinking how sweet she is, and then going out and getting worms for a bird, for little baby birds. I don't think that. But when you get a particular type of body, there's attachments that go with that particular type of body. I mean, just like if you go to a zoo, you see the male gorilla is attached to the female gorilla. I mean, I have no attachment for a female gorilla. I mean, can you imagine, you know, a picture on my wall? Actually, we had one devotee who had pictures of gorillas on their wall, but anyway, she worked in the zoo. But can you imagine, like on my altar, there's a picture of a gorilla, and we're not talking about Hanuman, of course, not you, but anyway, Hanuman's not a gorilla. Anyway, he's a Kimpurusha. Kimpurusha, which means, you know, he has features of a human, features of a monkey. So, can you imagine getting attached to a gorilla, or, you know, or a female cockroach, or a male cockroach, or any of these different species of life? You know, that most of the species have, you know, are sexual like that. In other words, as a male and female. When you get down to the amoebas, they don't need a wife. They do the reproduction by themselves. And, you know, and amoebas also have their attachments to some little smaller bug, and they envelop them with their cytoplasmic mechanism, and they eat them in that way. Or parameciums, they like to swim. They even have a outboard motor built into them. Have anyone seen a paramecium? They actually have a motor that spins, that propels them. So in any case, you know, it's the attachment. According to the body, we have specific objects of attachment. And that attachment, like in that story of the two birds, Kapota and Kapoti, caused misery. Because the parents were attached to little baby birds. The little baby birds were captured by the hunter. And then ultimately, the mother tries to save them. That causes her death, and the father, he just basically has a heart attack and falls into the net. And he dies too. So you see that attachment. So the question is, give up the attachment. So giving up the attachment means refocusing the mind. That's really the point. As stated about Maharaj Ambarish, Savai Mana, Krishna Padaravindayo. He fixed his mind in Krishna, and it's described the various things he did to fix his mind. You know, his legs by walking to the temple, his smelling the fragrance offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, tongue, and vibrating the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and also tasting prasadam. So, Bhakti Yoga means basically to fix the mind on Krishna and those things related to Krishna. Then your attachment is naturally eradicated and you don't suffer. And of course, another example we gave last night from the 11th canto about how to fix the mind was the example of the arrow maker. The arrow maker, he was making arrows and concentrating so much on getting the tip of the arrow done properly, and of course the feathers, because unless you do things properly with an arrow, it really won't go in a straight and true course. And unless the tip is sharp, it won't enter into the whatever you're shooting at. So he was concentrating so much that the king walked by, and he didn't see the king. That's interesting, isn't it? And so then we have the example of Haridas Thakur, who was concentrating so much on Krishna's holy names that something greater than the king, more attractive than the king, which is Maya Devi herself, came I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it? I don't think any of us would want that sort of test in our Krishna consciousness. So Mayadevi herself came before Haridas Thakur and was like, I think the exact description is, or paraphrasing the description is like someone crying in the wilderness or crying when nobody was there. In other words, it had absolutely no effect on him because he was absorbed in Krishna's holy names. And, of course, he had no material desires. But as we mentioned yesterday, there's no question of having no material desires and no spiritual desires. Because even if, let's say, one gives up material desires for some time and doesn't have spiritual desires, as soon as some material object comes along, boom, like Vishwamitra Muni. He was gradually giving up his material desires, wasn't taking up Krishna consciousness, and Menaka comes around, and boom, there's Shakuntala, a little baby being born. So you can't really give up material desires unless you actually take a higher taste. We mentioned that before. So Haridas Thakur is a prime example of that. So then we get to our own particular situation. That's why we have the rules and regulations of Bhakti Yoga. To engage our mind 24 hours a day in Krishna's service. And the example I've given many, many times before is Prabhupada's example of the milk cup, or the cup of milk being full, or having room. If it has room, then Prabhupada said it has room for ink. I don't know why you put ink in milk, but anyway, there'd be room for something else. So, in other words, we have to mold our life in such a way that 24 hours a day, we're Krishna conscious. And the best way that I've seen to do it, according to Srila Prabhupada's directions, is to have a very strong morning program. Nowadays, of course, in this ISKCON, especially second generation, everybody like that, the evening becomes a time for enjoyment. Of course, we preach into the university students. It's understood. Like poor Mahamantra is out there till midnight, bouncing around with his drum in Krishna West, and then the next day he has to put toothpicks under his eyelids to keep them open, isn't it? Right now he's just like swaying from side to side. Sometimes you wonder whether he has Parkinson's disease or something, because he's so tired all the time. So, I mean, that's understandable. When you're preaching to people, that's understandable. But we see this whole emphasis on neglect. It's an emphasis on the evening, neglect of the morning. I mean, I have this discussion with so many new people, and they say, I just can't get up early. I can't go to sleep early. I mean, it's a common thread in people's conversations that I have with them, and then inevitably there's some weakness. I'm weak spiritually because of that. And weakness means they're not able to think of Krishna all day long. Because when you do something, even psychologically, physiologically, do something early in the morning, the rest of the day is going to be, at least a modicum of Krishna consciousness. I mean, just like last night, I was dreaming and I was chanting the Pranam prayers to Prabhupada, in my dream. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasaya Bhutale, and then I said, wow, this is great. Anyway, but if you don't chant them on a regular basis, you're not going to chant them when you're dreaming either. So that's why we have rules and regulations. People accuse ISKCON, you're so strict, yes, rules and regulations. But the rules and regulations, like one learning to play an instrument, are to enable one to come to the platform of being spontaneous. That, like when you're learning to play the piano, you have to do your scales. Unless you happen to be, like from your last birth in this material world, Chopin or Beethoven or something like, you find these child prodigies who just at 6 months of age, da 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 da, You didn't play any scales. I mean, that's like, a child prodigy like that is like a Nityasiddha devotee, in the sense that, you know, Nityasiddha devotee is automatically Krishna conscious from his very birth. A child prodigy is automatically a good piano player or whatever practically from his very birth. But most of us are not spiritual child prodigies. We're the opposite. You know, from our very birth, in other words, we were born in the darkness of ignorance. We're not born in an Acharya family. So therefore, that regulation helps us. And I've seen that in my own life. Even though when I first joined the movement, it was the most difficult thing. Everything else was easy. Shave my head, being a vegetarian, chanting 60 rounds. You know, that's simple stuff. But waking up early was like, oh my God. This is something that was really hard for all of us, waking up early. And so I was fortunate, I joined Krishna Conscious Boot Camp, where the temple president wouldn't let us get more than 5 hours of sleep. He wouldn't let us sleep, you know, that was a little too much. Wouldn't let us sleep during the day, basically, except during Bhagavatam class. Yeah, we had to stand up during Bhagavatam. But it was actually good training. And so now, I make sure I do that every day. I mean, hopefully I've made a little advancement. You know, maybe I'm on a little higher platform of devotional service, but Prabhupada said we should always be afraid of Maya. And even Prabhupada, who was, you know, absolutely pure Nityasiddha devotee, he asked the devotees, you know, basically to pray that he wouldn't be in Maya. Because Prabhupada was always in Yoga Maya. But Prabhupada, by his example, was showing us, you know, they have to have a healthy fear. And even Prahlad Maharaj, we find previously, Prahlad Maharaj says, you know, I'm not afraid of your fearsome form as Lord Nrsingadev. You know, he's not afraid of these. He wasn't afraid of his father. Can you imagine not being afraid of some like demon that's as big as this building, probably bigger? And he's, you know, he's throwing you off cliffs. He's putting you in a pit of vipers. He's having your mother poison you. I mean, God. I'm afraid when certain devotees drive a car and I'm sitting in the passenger seat. You know, we have one disciple in Germany, you know, when he drives a car, you know, my chanting becomes very pure. You know, I hope he's not listening. But anyway, so, you know, I get fearful of anything. So, but Prahlad Maharaj said, he's not afraid of any of these things, but I'm afraid of your illusory energy. And here's a pure devotee. You know, God has just appeared before him. God has been protecting him all along. And he's still afraid of Maya, huh? What's happening? That's the humility. And in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, it describes this abject humility is the price, one of the prices you have to pay to enter into Krishna's pastimes, to become a pure devotee of the Lord. So, I mean, I get up early in the morning, and I'm just thinking if I don't get up, I'd be in Maya. You know, I'm just afraid. And I like it, too. You know, after a while, you start to like it. You know, a day, it's just like people are addicted to taking coffee in the morning. Without coffee, they're just so grumpy. I remember my mother. You know, I talked to her in the morning, she was on edge. And I said, did you take your coffee yet? And as soon as she took her coffee, you know, she was normal, so to speak. And so it's like that. You know, I feel like Mangalarti and the morning programs like that, you know, not exactly like coffee, but it's like, you know, you're not normal. It's not normal. You know, it's ingrained in me. So in this way, the mind can be fixed throughout the day. And then Krishna's arranged so many nice things to fix my mind. You know, there's people to preach to, there's things to do, you know, so many things. Even if the mind is fixed in anxiety, it's still the mind is fixed. even if you're in anxiety, like Prabhupada was in anxiety too about many things. When he sent Tamal Krishna Maharaj to buy the land in Mayapur, Prabhupada was in anxiety over safety. Prabhupada was in anxiety over the devotee's fate who he sent to Pakistan, because he had read that Hare Krishna devotees had been killed in Pakistan. And actually they hadn't. The news wasn't correct. But Prabhupada was in anxiety about that. But that's also thinking about Krishna, because it's all centered on Krishna. Anxiety how to spread the movement, anxiety about the future. Like sometimes we're anxiety about the future of Newgoloka. What can be done? How to assure that the worship of the deities will go on, for the foreseeable future when we pass away, 50, 100, 200 years. So this sort of anxiety is also thinking of Krishna. It's not that you're in anxiety and you're not, and if it's based on Krishna, and you're thinking, well, let me get out of anxiety so I can think of Krishna, but that anxiety is also Krishna. So you have to structure your life beginning from the morning, so you're always, according to your psychophysical nature. That's important too. Just like if you're a teacher, you're thinking about teaching. If you're Pujari, you're thinking about how the deities are going to be dressed. You're just meditating on that. So if you're attached to your service throughout the rest of the day, you're meditating on your service and how to do it properly. So in this way, you'll be like the arrow maker. You won't notice the material miseries. That's the way to overcome the material miseries. So any questions or comments about these things? Very interesting purport. What Prabhupada says, again, I'm mentioning what Prabhupada says, we give up our constitutional position. And the Acharyas say the same thing. We gave up our constitutional position, and also Prabhupada said here in the first translation of the first verse, first word in the verse, that the material mind is the cause of all suffering in the material world, the attachment. So, any questions or comments? Or arguments? Or problems? Yeah. Sleep is, if you're sleeping so you get energy, yes. But you can't say, sleep, Prabhupada said sleep is service, therefore 22 hours a day sleep. Eating prasadam is service too. So wake up, Kumbhakarna philosophy. Wake up, eat, go back to sleep. That's a nice philosophy. I guess it's service. So you're expert in that service. You perfected it. So anyway, we need enough sleep so that we can serve Krishna. Because memory is a function, to a certain extent, of sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, your memory is not going to function properly. And also doing some research, which I'm working on with Radharaja, that if you don't get enough sleep is the time where the cellular, we call it cellular garbage, gets disposed of. In other words, there are cells that are decomposing, dying, and things like that. So if you don't rest, then you're not allowing the garbage disposal people, which is your body, to get rid of the cellular garbage, and it builds up, and you can get all sorts of things like cancer and other things like that if you don't get enough rest at night. So many things occur. Enough rest has to be there, and too much stress is not good. Enough rest and proper diet. If you have too much protein, also too much cellular garbage too. But that's another subject matter for my health seminar, and that's the Bhagavatam class. Okay, on that happy note, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.